Okay, so I've got a bunch of, I guess the main themes, some of the main themes, obviously there's other themes in the book, but a lot of the main themes of the novel, we'll try to weave them in to the lecture today. But as I said, the main focus of the lecture, we've got to wrap up the end of the last chapter we didn't quite finish, Lightness and Weight. It was like one of the Tomas chapters. There's one or two passages I want to read close to the end of that chapter. So that we'll wrap that up, and then we'll move on to the Grand March, which is a metaphor we've already been introduced to. And it doesn't come up till about halfway through the chapter, so we might have to hold off to, he explains it a little bit further. But the first time it appears in the novel, he does mention, it's sort of this metaphor for the Grand March of Europe, right? The European culture, this notion of freedom and liberty and, I guess European Enlightenment, those sort of values. Again, he'll expand on it a little bit later, so we'll get to that later in the class. But the chapter 6 starts out with this idea of kitsch, which I mentioned earlier because the word comes up earlier in the book, but we get a fuller explanation of kitsch. And I'm gonna try to use as little profanity as possible. I already have a potty mouth, so I'm gonna try to be a really good boy and only use the profanity that's in the quotes that I've picked. So I doubt I'll be able to do that. I wish there was like one of those profanity jars that I'd put $1 in every time I said it. That might be able to I control my, my sailor, talk like a sailor. My potty mouth might be able to be controlled more if there was some sort of temptation or some sort of punishment for it. But anyway, the chapter starts with kitsch, and it's kind of funny, I think. It's pretty profane, but funny nonetheless. Gonna skip all the stuff I think about Stalin's son, though. That's pretty gross, so I don't know if I'm gonna get into Stalin, his death and all that, to Stalin's son. But let me find the passage I was talking about. It's towards the end of chapter 5. And or part 5, you know me, I keep doing that. Part 5, Lightness and Weight. This is on page 238, I think, is what I'm looking for. Okay. This is, I guess, towards the end of chapter 23, and Tomas is having a dream. Okay. We're skipping quite a bit. Like there's a scene I wanted to cover, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, where he meets his son. His son kind of finds him out, and his son has kind of become a bit of a revolutionary. He wants him to like sign this petition, and this is maybe another example of, we were talking about the public-private divide last lecture, and where Tomas is a private guy and he was forced into the public, and all the sort of pitfalls and the sort of compromises of character that he's forced into. And also, I guess the passage I was going to read was, he was frustrated by how his article was misunderstood, right? When we put some message out there in the world, we publicize it for all these strangers who don't know us personally to read, then we open ourselves up for criticism. But a lot of times they'll misunderstand and they take us the wrong way. I think Tomas sees his profession as a surgeon a little bit more honest. When he's not being questioned, he's being questioned right in one-to-one with somebody who can look at him and he can explain himself and that sort of thing. And, when they're trying to get him to sign the letter, they're saying, you could save lives. He's like, I could, but I knew I was saving lives when I was a surgeon, right? And so this is actually a pretty common theme in existentialism, right? The difference between concrete possibilities versus abstract possibilities. The concrete possibility of seeing someone flesh and blood to help them as a surgeon or a teacher or whatever, community leader, versus some abstract possibility of helping the war, the cause, the whatever. That's kind of getting into kitsch. So maybe I'll shut up about that, because this passage, well, in a way it fits in. I don't know if this is exactly kitsch, but what is Tomas's dream? Tomas has this dream of this beautiful woman that fills his heart with some sort of like parasitic joy, right? Not parasitic, but like he's in paradise. And he's haunted by this dream. This is at the bottom of page 238. The woman in the dream he thought was unlike any he had ever met. The woman he felt he knew most intimately of all had turned out to be a woman he did not even know. I think maybe this is a representative of, he doesn't even know it, but if I were Freud, I'd be like, this is Sabina. You guys are right for each other. Like, you and Sabina get each other. Out of the two characters in the book that understand each other the most, I think, are Tomas and Sabina. Maybe, I don't know, that's sort of an interpretation. So again, the woman he felt he knew most intimately of all turned out to be a woman he didn't even know, this dream woman in his dream. Yet she was the one he had always longed for. If a personal paradise were ever to exist for him, then in that paradise he would have to live by her side, The woman from his dream was the Eskimo sign of his love, right? It must be. He suddenly recalled the famous myth from Plato's Symposium. People were hermaphrodites until God split them in two. And now all the halves wander the world over, seeking one another. Love is the longing for the half of ourselves that we have lost. Let us suppose that such is the case, that somewhere in the world each of us has a partner who once formed part of our body. Tomas's other part is the young woman he dreamed about. The trouble is, man does not find the other part of himself. Instead, he is sent to Teresa in a bulrush basket. But what happens if he nevertheless later meets the one who is meant for him, the other part of himself? Whom is he to prefer, the woman from the bulrush basket or the woman from Plato's myth? Anyone familiar with, I know in my intro class, I teach Plato's Symposium. We actually cover this in my intro to philosophy class. Anybody familiar with Plato's Symposium? No? Yeah, we've talked a little bit about Plato before, but the Symposium, to me, it's one of his best works, to be honest with you. It's very well written. It's beautiful aesthetically as a piece of literature, but also philosophically. It's got a lot of stuff going on. Wonderful, I think, piece of writing, whether you agree with the philosophy or not. But this is a work where they're all sitting around at a symposium. They're drinking together, discussing philosophical ideas, and they decide to talk about love. And they all give speeches in praise of love. And the myth that he's talking about is actually not Plato's theory. It's from one of the guys speaking. He's a playwright, Aristophanes. And Aristophanes, tells us this myth of love that at the beginning of all human time, when humans were created, when we first started, we were merged with another half. Not all of us were hermaphrodites, so he got that wrong, right? Some were, yes. So you've heard the story, right? They're double guy, double woman, and then it's mixed, right? And so that's why certain people are attracted to certain types, sort of the explanation. So love is a longing for completeness. We're not complete unless we find that other half that completes us. And so, ultimately, though, Plato, it gets, probably shouldn't get into it because I'll digress too much, right? His theory of love is a little bit more abstract, right? You probably have heard the term platonic love, it was purely platonic, right? For him, pure love is love of true beauty, and true beauty has nothing to do with the body, has nothing to do with anything physical. So the kind of love that that humans typically experience when we're sexually attracted to somebody, that's a very deficient version of love. For him, the highest love is, a love of the soul, and the soul is not bodily at all or whatever. But with the Aristophanes myth, I guess it's a little bit more bodily, right? I've got this bodily yearning to be complete. My other half is missing, and Tomas feels like this woman in his dream is the other half. And what if he actually met this woman in real life? What's the point of this passage? I think I have my ideas. What's he trying to say here? Maybe I'm biased, and just because it fits my philosophy, so I'm reading it a certain way. So I'm kind of leaving it open to you. What do you think the point of? He asks, who would he prefer? Who should he prefer? Maybe if you ask, that's not what he asked, but who should he prefer if he meets this perfect woman that's the woman of his dreams? What do you think? Should he dump Teresa and go with her? What do you think? Or should he just stick with Teresa, the bulrush basket? No one has any opinions on this?
I think you should dump Teresa.
Yeah, you think so? But for other reasons? Or do you think if this perfect woman came along, he should? Yeah. Okay, yeah. I don't think he should, actually. I don't think so. I think there's no such thing as the perfect woman. I think, this is something, and this is what I think the point he's making is, there's no such thing. We tell ourselves, because we're unhappy, no relationship's perfect, right? Everyone has their flaws. And so we tell ourselves, if I could find some guy or girl or whatever that was exactly like this, except this one thing was different, right? We have this image of what would be, and a lot of times too, I've gotten it. I've gotten everything I wanted. I had a list, I thought, all I need is a girl that's like this. Check this box, that box. Then I get one like that, and we are just not compatible. So it's like you think you want something, and you think it's going to give you fulfillment, and then, nothing, and no one other person's ever going to give you fulfillment. Humans are just that way. We're never completely happy, right? Remember when you were a kid and you were like, I'm going to get that toy for Christmas and I'll be fulfilled, For me, it was the He-Man castle, right? I wanted Castle Grayskull, right? When I get Castle Grayskull, I got all the characters, but I need Castle Grayskull because when I have that, then I'll have the set and I'll have it all together. Everything will be complete. My collection will be complete. and I get the castle, play with it for a few weeks, and I get bored with it. And then He-Man Toys comes out with a new thing, and I'm like, I want the new one, the Castle Grayskull edition, or whatever, you know what I mean? So again, I think to me that's sort of the point. But continue where I left off, 239. He tried to picture himself living in an ideal world with the young woman from the dream. He sees Teresa walking past the open windows of their ideal house. She is alone and stops to look in at him with an infinitely sad expression in her eyes. He cannot withstand her glance. Again, he feels her pain in his own heart. Again, he falls prey to compassion and seeks deep into her soul. He leaps out of the window, but she tells him bitterly to stay where he feels happy, making those abrupt, angular movements that so annoyed and displeased him. He grabs her nervous hands and presses them between his own hands to calm them. And he knows that time and again he will abandon the house of his happiness, time and again abandon his paradise and the woman from his dream, and betray the esmosine of his love to go off with Teresa, the woman born of 6 laughable fortuities. All this time he was sitting up in bed and looking at the woman who was lying beside him and holding his hand in her sleep. He felt an ineffable love for her. Her sleep must have been very light at the moment, because she opened her eyes and gazed up at him questioningly. "What are you looking at?" she asked. He knew that instead of waking her, he should lull her back to sleep, so he tried to come up with an answer that would plant the image of a new dream in her mind. "I'm looking at the stars," he said. "Don't say you're looking at the stars. That's a lie. You're looking down." "That's because we're in an airplane. The stars are below us." "Oh, in an airplane," said Teresa, squeezing his hand even tighter and falling asleep again. And Tomas knew that Teresa was looking out the round window of an airplane flying high above the stars. And that's a scene that repeats throughout the novel, right? She wakes up, and usually she's having an unsettling dream, and he calms her down, right? And again, I think that point is like, yeah, she's imperfect. There's things that annoy the hell out of you about her, but she's your little bulrush babe. You know what I mean? We're in an airplane. Go back to sleep, You're not going to find, there's no such thing as that woman in your dreams, right? That's the woman in your dreams, right? That's you like having doubts about choices in your life, right? What if I would have done it differently? Would it have been better? You don't get to find that out. You can't repeat, right? Anyway, okay, so now we need to move on to the next chapter. That was the end of chapter 5, or part 5, sorry. Now we're on the Grand March. And again, this theme, hold on, it's coming up, but it takes a while. We have to start with Kitsch, because really this is a version of Kitsch. The Grand March is just one flavor of this phenomenon of Kitsch that the author talks about. And he begins with the story of Stalin. Stalin and his, I'll let you guys read it, and those online, you can read it. I'm not gonna go over it, it's pretty disgusting, right? We already kind of talked about it, I think, last week. But I'm gonna start on chapter 3 when he's talking about, this is kind of silly enough, and there's enough profanity in this passage anyway. This is on page 245. This is where he gets into all the theological questions, right? And he's talking about, as a child leafing through the little Bible book with pictures of Adam and Eve and like all the illustrations of the stories from the Bible. And so this is where we get introduced to this notion of kitsch, okay? "When I was small and I'd leaf through the Old Testament retold for children and illustrated in engravings by Gustave Doré, I saw the Lord God standing on a cloud. He was an old man with eyes, nose, and a long beard. And I would say to myself that if he had a mouth, he had to eat. And if he ate, he had intestines. But that thought always gave me a fright, because even though I had come from a family that was not particularly religious, I felt the idea of a divine intestine to be sacrilegious. Either or. Either man was created in God's image, and God has intestines, or God lacks intestines, and man is not like him. The ancient Gnostics felt as I did at the age of 5. In the 2nd century, the great Gnostic master, Valentinus, resolved the damnable dilemma by claiming that Jesus ate and drank, but did not defecate. Shit is a more onerous theological problem than is evil. Since God gave man freedom, we can, if need be, accept the idea that he's not responsible for man's crimes. The responsibility for shit, however, rests entirely with him, the creator of man. Right, so, yeah, I don't know if a lot of philosophers might not agree with this. The problem of evil is a big issue. How does evil exist if God could stop it? one way to answer that. Well, we have free will. God created us, he gave us free will. It's better that we have free will than we don't have free will. It gives us a certain dignity. And so that's the price we pay. Because we're free, we're able to create bad and evil things. But God would never create evil because God's good. So that sort of solves the dilemma of evil. Again, there's a lot of philosophers that would poke holes in that argument, but most people don't think that deep and they'll accept it. But the fact that we have to take a shit and it smells really bad, that's kind of like not easy to resolve. Like God made us. We didn't make the intestines. You know, if God created us, he created us to crap. And that's kind of gross. So this is chapter 4 at the bottom of the page. What the great theologian found incompatible with paradise was not sexual intercourse. Oh yeah, so he thought that in paradise, Adam did not get aroused or get an erection because he felt excited. He just used his mind. He's like, oh, we should have sex right now. Turn on, you know, and it just turned on, right? Sex wasn't, tied to the body. It wasn't tied to our lustful desires, right? This was Erigena's idea, some early theologian. What the great theologian found incompatible with paradise was not sexual intercourse and the attendant pleasure. What he found incompatible with paradise was excitement. Bear in mind, there was pleasure in paradise, but no excitement. Right? That was too naughty, right? Oh, I'm aroused. No, that's not good. Not until after man, this is on the top of 247, not until after God had expelled man from paradise did he make him feel disgust. Man began to hide what shamed him. Yeah, so if you know the story from Genesis, it's not until Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge that they feel shame of their nakedness and they start covering their bodies. Before that, they just walked around with their jiggly bits all hanging out, no big deal, right? And that's how God knew. He's like, why do you cover yourself? Like, I don't know, we're covering ourselves. You ate the tree, I know you ate from the tree, the apple. It was the snake. It was her. Get out of my garden. Right? Again, not until after God had expelled man from paradise did he make him feel disgust. Man began to hide what shamed him, and by the time he removed the veil, he was blinded by a great light. Thus, immediately after his introduction to disgust, he was introduced to excitement. Without shit, in both the literal and figurative senses of the word, there would be no sexual love as we know it, accompanied by a pounding heart and blinded senses. So this is where we get our body, I guess. This is, again, a theme from the book, body and soul and body. This is where the carnal desires are introduced. Chapter 5. Now we're starting to get to Kitsch here. The dispute between those who believe that the world was created by God and those who think it came into its being of its own accord deals with the phenomenon that go beyond our reason and experience. Much more real is the line separating those who doubt being as it is granted to man, no matter how or by whom, from those who accept it without reservation. Right? So you might say that Tomas and Sabina accept it without reservation. They don't like it to be covered up, right? They like to open their eyes. They like light. They don't want things, they don't want stories and narratives, and they don't like kitsch. We'll get to that in a second. But then there's others who, kind of have to find some sort of compromise with being. Behind all the European faiths, religious and political, we find the first chapter of Genesis. That's an interesting thing. He says, so behind all European faiths, all the religions, and even political movements that claim to be secular, there's a sort of underlying theme that we could trace back to the first chapter of Genesis. It tells us that the world was created properly. Right? God created it, saw that it was good. Hey, there's my creation. Pretty good job. Pat myself on the back. Right? So the world was created properly, so the human existence must be good, and we are therefore entitled to multiply. Let us call this basic faith a categorical agreement with being. The fact that until recently the word shit appeared in print as S has nothing to do with moral considerations. You can't claim that shit is immoral after all. The objection to shit is a metaphysical one. The daily defecation session is daily proof of the unacceptability of creation. Either or. Either shit is acceptable, in which case don't lock yourself in the bathroom, or we are created in an unacceptable manner. It follows then that the aesthetic ideal of the categorical agreement with being is a world in which shit is denied and everyone acts as though it did not exist. This aesthetic ideal is called Kitsch. Kitsch is a German word born in the middle of the sentimental 19th century. And from German, it entered into all Western languages. Repeated use, however, has obliterated its original metaphysical meaning. Kitsch is the absolute denial of shit, in both the literal and figurative senses of the word. Kitsch excludes everything from its purview, which is essentially unacceptable in human existence. Right? So again, Sabina has used this word a lot, and it's pretty obvious. You can tell she hates this. She likes people being straight, honest, don't sugarcoat it, right? Just be straight. Chapter 6, Sabina's initial inner revolt against communism was aesthetic rather than ethical in character. That word keeps popping up, so I should pause here and make sure you guys know what this means. What is aesthetic? So Kitsch, the author is claiming that Kitsch is an aesthetic ideal, right? And Sabina's problem with Kitsch was not ethical, right? Her problem with communism, Her problem with communism was not ethical. It wasn't the doctrine itself, maybe she had problems with it, but what really repulsed her the most about communism was the aesthetic. It was aesthetic reasons. What does that mean? Ethical, I'm assuming y'all know what that means. Had to do with morality, right and wrong. But is aesthetic? No one knows what something's aesthetically pleasing. Talking about just aesthetic considerations, nobody knows what it means. Having to do with appearance, right? Having to do with the way something is presented. Right? If you ever take a class in philosophy that's called aesthetics, it's philosophy of art or philosophy of beauty. Right? Are there standards of beauty? Is there an objective standard for what's beautiful? Is there not a standard? Is it just subjective and just based on your opinion? Those are aesthetic questions, right? So Kitsch is an aesthetic ideal. It makes the world look pretty. It's a Disney version of everything. PG-13. No, G. Forget PG-13. That's too upsetting. Right? That's too real. PG-13 is too real. Gotta G-rate that crap. Right? So her initial inner revolt against communism was aesthetic rather than ethical in character. What repelled her was not nearly so much the ugliness of the communist world, ruined castles transformed into cowsheds. Not so much that as the mask of beauty that it tried to wear. In other words, communist kitsch. The model of communist kitsch is the ceremony called May Day. Remember the May Day parade? She hated the May Day parade. That was kitsch. That was communist kitsch. Everyone's marching with their fists. Look how great it is to be in the communist country. We love the leadership. They're so great. The party rules. It was all fake. It was all crap. She hated it. She wanted to go hide in the bathroom. Right. On chapter 7, 249. 10 years later, so not only, is American kitsch any better? There's an example in chapter 7, right? Communist kitsch sucks, but what about capitalist kitsch? Capitalist kitsch sucks too, according to Sabina, right? 10 years later, by which time she was living in America, a friend of some friends, an American senator, took Sabina for a drive in his gigantic car, his 4 children bouncing up and down in the back. The senator stopped the car in front of a stadium with an artificial skating rink, and the children jumped out and started running along the large expanse of grass surrounding it. Sitting behind the wheel and gazing dreamily after the 4 little bounding figures, he said to Sabina, "Just look at them." And describing a circle with his arm, a circle that was meant to take in the stadium, grass, and children, he said, "Now that's what I call happiness." Behind his words, there was more than joy at seeing children run and grass grow. There was a deep understanding of the plight of a refugee from a communist country where the senator was convinced no grass grew or children ran. At that moment, an image of the senator standing on a reviewing stand in a Prague square flashed through Sabina's mind. The smile on his face was the smile communist statesmen beamed from the height of their reviewing stand to identically smiling citizens in the parade below. How did the senator know that children meant happiness? Could he see into their souls? What if the moment they were out of sight, 3 of them jumped the 4th and began beating him up? The senator had only one argument in his favor, his feeling. When the heart speaks, the mind finds it indecent to object. In the realm of Kitsch, the dictatorship of the heart reigns supreme. The feeling induced by Kitsch must be a kind the multitudes can share. Kitsch may not, therefore, depend on an unusual situation. It must derive from the basic images people have engraved in their memories. The ungrateful daughter, the neglected father, children running on the grass, the motherland betrayed, first love. Kitsch causes 2 tears to flow in quick succession. The first tear says, "How nice to see children running on the grass." The second tear says, "How nice to be moved together with all mankind by children running on the grass." It is the second tier that makes Kitsch Kitsch. The brotherhood of mankind on earth will be possible only on the basis of Kitsch. And we'll get to this later, so maybe I shouldn't expand on it too much. As much as he bashes on Kitsch, he seems to say everybody needs a little Kitsch. Everybody needs a little bit. You know, even Tomas and Sabina. What is Sabina's Kitsch? Does she ever really get Kitsch? We'll find out later when I get to the passage, but who knows? Tomas? What's his Kitsch? Sabina? No one has any guesses? Well, I think with women, he's actually less kitschy, because like with the women, he's like, they're just women. I'm just exploring their bodies. I would say he's probably more kitsch with Teresa. Like the image of the bulrush basket, my little baby, and I'm taking care of her. She's like Moses or whatever. I think that's kind of his kitsch, his sort of heartwarming, feeling good about, taking care of her. And I think with Sabina, I don't know, it's hard to explain exactly her kitsch. Well, she wants to go back. She feels like she's a horrible daughter, I think. She feels guilty about how bad she treated her dad. Because her dad was kind of a dick, but she's like, he was a dick because he loved her. She kind of realized that after he died. She's like, was he that bad? He was being mean because he wanted what was best for me. And he was closed-minded, but that's where he was from. He was an old guy from an older time. And I think she sort of longs for Franz even. She's like, maybe I should have stuck with Franz. And she's sort of thinking, maybe I want a family. Later on in the chapter, we learn she befriends this old couple and she helps take care of them, right? And they become her kids and her parents at the same time, double function. So there's a little kitsch in her too, right? It's a part of the human condition, as he puts it. As much as he craps on it, he says it's kind of something everybody needs a little bit of kitsch. Nobody can be completely we have to cover it up a little bit. We have to sugarcoat it a little bit. But right, even this senator, right, this guy who thinks, he's looking at her thinking, oh, you must love it here in America. Isn't it so great? And he has this image of his own country that's just completely sanitized, right? He's not realizing, look, there's problems here too. And he probably has this really cartoony version of what's going on in her country. There were no kids playing in the street and it was just smokestacks and no grass growing anywhere. He has this desolate picture of the Soviet Union. I remember I grew up in the 80s during the height of the Cold War. And, Russian women are considered some of the most beautiful women in the world. Most models, you look their last name is something you can't pronounce, it's Kornakovia or whatever, but in the 80s, everyone was this image of the Russian woman was oh, they're ugly and they don't shave their arms. And it was this big, manly looking women, that was the stereotype. I remember the first time, actually meeting some Russians when I I guess when I moved to Austin, I made friends with a couple of Russians, and I was there was a chick there. I was wow, they're not like they said in the movies, right? But again, it's just propaganda. It's just this sort of fake story. But some people I think never get out of that bubble. The senator guy sounds like one of those types. He's living in a dream world and everything's so perfect over here. Isn't it nice? The kids just love it. No, maybe they do it. Maybe they run around the corner and beat the third guy up. How do you know, right? But this is another thing too. Kitsch is always based on, how does he put it? It's based on a feeling that the multitudes can share. So it kind of oversimplifies, I think, our emotions. Our emotions are complicated, but Kitsch is kind of makes it simple, the longing for the mother. Everyone's situation is unique. Kitsch sort of takes away that uniqueness and makes it sort of more simple in general, so we can all kind of understand it. And this is what makes this notion of the brotherhood of man even possible. And he writes in chapter 9, no one knows this better than politicians. Whenever a camera is in the offing, they immediately run to the nearest child, lift it in the air, kiss it on the cheek. Kitsch is the aesthetic ideal of all politicians and all political parties and movements, right? Oh, and I skipped. We should talk a bit about that. The point about the two tiers. I like that. The first tier is fine, kind of in a way. It's human, right? Kitsch causes two tiers to flow. The first tier says, "How nice to see children running on the grass." To me, that's fine, right? That's not really covering. Sometimes you see kids and it makes you feel good. You're like, innocent. But then when you're like thinking about, then the second tier is like, I bet other people would be moved by this as well. We're so human together, the brotherhood of man, that kind of thing. And there's I don't know why, but this image of The Simpsons just jumped into my brain. I remember there's an episode of The Simpsons where it shows like the moon landing, and like Homer Simpson has his freaking earphones on, like listening to like Vanilla Fudge. It's like during this, the 60s, so he's like a hippie Homer. It's like a flashback, and he's on the couch like jamming out like with his headphones on, and his dad is watching the moon landing on TV, and he sees, "I want a small step for man," and then a tear comes down his eye. He starts crying. He's like, so proud to be human, so proud to be, that sort of. That's. I think that's what we call Kitsch, right? That tier of togetherness. And again, there's nothing completely wrong with this, but it's completely fake, I guess is what he's saying. It's based on some bullshit story. Oh, I did it. I said a cuss word that wasn't in the text. Darn it. That was the first one, though. I was going so well. What are we, 30 minutes in? I'm pretty good. Okay, all right. So again, no one knows this better than politicians. When a camera's in the offing, they immediately run to the nearest child, lift it in the air, kiss it on the cheek. I haven't seen that in a while. That's not something, we used to see that old campaign footage of all the presidential candidates kissing a baby. Probably not now with COVID going on and all that, but that was a big, kissing a baby on the cheek. But yeah, I wouldn't want some old, But you gotta understand, the people that do it are ones that are already their fan. They're at some big rally, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I love Barack," or "I love Trump," or whoever they love, and they're like, "Yeah, kiss my baby." Yeah, it's silly, right? It's the thing. Those of us who live in a society where various political tendencies exist side by side and competing influences cancel or limit one another, we can manage more or less to escape the Kitsch Inquisition. Spanish Inquisition or Roman Inquisition, right? But I don't think that's true, though. I think we do live in a society like that, right? We've got a left and a right divide in this country, but I have friends on both sides, and they're both the Inquisition. Sometimes, whenever I disagree with them, I have to, decide, do I really want to say I disagree? Or should I just shut up and just keep it to myself? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you're right. Whatever, just move on next subject. Because I think they do. Why don't you believe? Are you one of those Trump supporters? Or are you one of those Biden socialists? It's y'all both are crazy. Leave me alone, leave me alone. But I think it's better at least than being in a, totalitarian Kitsch, which we're getting to here in a second, right? In this kind of society, in our society, we can more or less escape the Kitsch Inquisition. The individual can preserve his individuality. The artist can create unusual works. But whenever a single political movement corners power, we find ourselves in the realm of totalitarian Kitsch. When I say totalitarian, what I mean is that everything that infringes on Kitsch must be banished for life. Every display of individualism, because a deviation from the collective is a spit in the eye of the smiling brotherhood. Every doubt, because anyone who starts doubting details will end by doubting life itself. And all irony, because in the realm of Kitsch, everything must be taken quite seriously, right? That's why when he writes that article about Oedipus, and it's like, these people who betrayed our country should pull their eyes out like Oedipus. They took him literally, right? No irony there, right? And the mother who abandons her family, or the man who prefers men to women, right? All this is banished from totalitarian Kitsch. Anything that's unusual or doesn't fit the sort of standard cookie cutter norm, that has to be cast aside. Calling into question the holy decree, be fruitful and multiply. In this light, we can regard the gulag as a septic tank used by totalitarian Kitsch to dispose of its refuse. What's a gulag? Who knows what a gulag is? They had them in the Soviet Union. A gulag? Who knows what a gulag is, man?
We're the survivors, people, I don't know, I'm thinking Call of Duty,
Oh, they use that term in Call of Duty?
Yeah.
What is it in the game? What is it in?
A bunker, I think.
Okay, wow, they use that as a bunker? That's kind of messed up. It's where the Soviets put dissidents as a concentration camp. they would make them go and do slave labor, and a lot of them were killed. It was like Auschwitz times 10. Stalin murdered more people than Hitler did in the gulags. I can't believe they call it's just a bunker that you go like I don't, maybe that's what it means maybe that's what it literally means in Russian. Like if you translate the word gulag from Russian into English, maybe it means bunker. So maybe that's not as bad as I think it is, but like it has connotations like the gulag. You know, you're gonna go to the gulag if you don't say all that stuff because the government's gonna come get you and put you in the gulag. That's it's kind of a proverbial thing, but yeah. So the gulag is a septic tank used by totalitarian Kitsch to dispose of its refuse, right? Anybody that speaks up, right? Like who's the guy, Solzhenitsyn, he survived the gulag. He wrote a book called The Gulag Archipelago, where he talks about how he survived the concentration, well, the gulag, concentration camp, whatever. Okay, so now we get back to Sabina. Actually, Teresa and Sabina are in chapter 10, but I'm going to focus on Sabina, right? She's talking about like communist kitsch, and you can actually find some of this stuff on YouTube, these films that are being referred to here. They used to be hard to come by, but now they're all restored, and you can watch them, and they're like ridiculously silly. Like they're just like Stalin is God, basically. Not literally God, there's like Stalin is such a beautiful, wonderful leader, Russia's homeland, and like, she talks about it, right? Like there's no conflict. The greatest conflict that would occur between Russians was a lover's misunderstanding. He thought she no longer loved him. She thought he no longer loved her. But in the final scene, they'd fall into each other's arms, tears of happiness trickling down their cheeks. Just sappy as can be. No real conflict. It's just so like PG, like G even, right? It's like worse than a Disney movie. Like Disney, but like at least Disney, like Bambi's mom died. Like something happens. Like there's conflict, right? It's more like, but this is like even worse, right? There's like nothing. So talking about Kabina, right? How she reacts to these films. She starts to feel kitsch though, even with these films. At first she was repulsed by them. This is the top of page 253. Their current conventional interpretation of these films is this, that they showed the communist ideal, whereas communist reality was worse. Sabina always rebelled against that interpretation. Whenever she imagined the world of Soviet kitsch becoming a reality, she felt a shiver run down her spine. She would unhesitatingly prefer life in a real communist regime with all its persecution and meat queues. Life in the real communist world was still livable. In the world of the communist ideal made real, in that world of grinning idiots, she would have nothing to say. She would die of horror within a week. I feel like I'm kind of like, this is maybe why I like Houston so much. Everybody thinks I'm a freak because I like Houston better than any other city in Texas. I grew up in San Antonio. I lived in Austin for like 8 years. And, oh, you live in Austin? That's so awesome. I'm like, Houston rules. They're like, what? You like Houston better? But like, I don't know, there's something about Houston too, the fact that it's like a gritty, ugly city. Like, I know it's not the prettiest city. Their downtown's nice. You go like around Rice University. And there's neighborhoods that are real pretty, but like, San Antonio is a better looking city. Austin's a better looking city. But I think Houston's a more real city. Like, there's more life here. There's more culture. There's more difference of opinion. I think Austin's very homogenous. Everyone's like, keep Austin beer. We're all hip, yeah, man. Like all like hipster chic, and then San Antonio, like no offense, but it's just a little too Hispanic. It's very Catholic Hispanic. And Houston, I love it because there's no one culture or political view that dominates, and I like that's more real. It's more interesting anyway. And it's also not the prettiest city. But this reminds me a bit of David Lynch, one of my favorite filmmakers. He was living in Philly, I think, Pittsburgh, which is a really ugly city, all these factories and stuff. And he had this scholarship to go study film when he was really young, I think in Hollywood. And he lasted like a few weeks. He's like, I gotta go back to Pittsburgh. He's like, it's too pretty out here. I can't create art in Utopia, right? I have to have something ugly and real and ugly pollution. And, if everything's just so pretty and butterflies, like I'm not inspired to create, and it's kind of odd, but I kind of relate to that. And I think Sabina does too. She's like, for her, I'd rather be in this ugly communist world. It sucks and it's hard and it's harrowing, but that like a fake world where everyone's like, everything's great, like Joel Osteen smile 24/7. I'd go nuts. Yeah, I'd go nuts. I'd be like, what the heck's going on? This is just some weird freaking like Barney episode or something I got stuck in. What's going on here? The feeling of Soviet kitsch evoked in Sabina strikes me as very much like the horror Teresa experienced in her dream of being marched around a swimming pool with a group of naked women forced to sing cheerful songs with them while corpses floated just below the surface of the pool. Teresa could not address a single question, a single word to any of the women. The only response she would have got was the next stanza of the current song. Right, the latest freaking whatever Britney Spears hit. I guess that's an old reference, but I need to update that. Whoever the latest pops, who's Ariana Grande? I guess she's old now too. She could not even give any of them a secret wink. They would immediately have pointed her out to the man standing in the basket over the pool, and he would have shot her dead. Teresa's dream reveals the true function of kitsch. Kitsch is a folding screen set up to curtain off death. That's a very unclear, like, what does it mean to curtain off death? Well, he doesn't really explain that. But remember earlier in the chapter, he's talking about, and we've talked about this already in the class, maybe I shouldn't dwell on it too much, but the idea that a lot of what we call kitsch, religion, political theory, even funeral rites and things that we do literally for people who die is a way of us sort of dealing with it and not dealing with it, not having to face the facts of, look, they're dead. Like, no, they're in a happy place. I'll see them later. You know, it's to console us, right? We tell ourselves, oh, it's to honor the dead, and all. No, it's for our conscience kind of thing. And so kitsch, in a way, not only is it dishonest, but I love this image of the dream, right? She can't even wink at these women because they'll call her out, right? You weren't following the chorus. You did something different, and you were trying to give us, teacher, she winked at that kind of thing, right? Remember one time, I think it was in kindergarten, this image, maybe this is why I've never trusted authority. Maybe this is the beginning of this is like my first memory, but I had a school bus driver, and I don't know if I want to blame her for this, but I remember watching some show on TV as a kid. I was really young, kindergarten, first grade, and probably today, I was watching a skit, and today it probably would be called racist by politically, because it was like Italian Americans, and they used the phrase, Mamma Mia, which I'd never heard. I thought it was funny as a kid. I thought it sounded funny. Mamma Mia, right? I said it on the school bus. I was at the back seat of the bus. I said it, and this kid heard me say it. Said, that's a bad word. I think he thought Mamma Mia was an effer or something. I don't know, but I was like, no, it's just Mamma Mia. I heard it on TV the other night, and he went and told the bus driver. And then I was trying to defend myself, right? And the bus driver didn't believe me, believed the kid, and the kid next to him didn't hear me, but backed him up because he didn't want to get in trouble. Oh yeah, I heard it. Yeah, he said it. Yeah, he did. And everybody else just agreed. It was like, and then I got in trouble with my dad. When he dropped me off, he got my dad in the car and said what I said, which I didn't even say. And I was like, what the hell? I denied everything. I was like, my dad's like, come on, son. I was like, no, Dad. I was like, I swear, I just said Mamma Mia. That's all I said. No, you said that. What the hell, right? But again, it was just a sort of like mass psychosis. Like only one kid heard it and the rest of them just backed him up because they were like, oh, the authority figure. Yeah, he did, or whatever. I feel like I'm Teresa in her dream, right? Trying to wink at the, whatever. Come on, guys, be cool. Let's, I'm really bad like that. I always get in trouble at work at the meeting. I'm the one that says whatever he wants to say, and the boss gets all pissed at me, fires me. And I'm like, but everybody else was talking about it before you got here. Come on, guys. And like, no, we're cool. What? In fact, I think that happened. I was listening to the radio to James Brown's bass player or one of his musicians. It was a funny interview. They're talking to this guy that was like touring with James Brown in his heyday, right? When James Brown was like at the height of his career, playing sold out shows all over the country. And the backup band wasn't getting paid as much as they thought they were worth. And they were all complaining about it. And they convinced the bass player, whoever this guy was, to go talk to James Brown about it. And James Brown's like, we've decided that we want more money and this and that. And James Brown's like, we decided, was that you or that? Or did they convince you to come convince me to do that? And he basically said, look, I'm gonna fire your ass unless you change your mind. He's like, you gonna do this? And he's like, no, they're gonna back me up. They're gonna quit too. Did they quit too? Hell no, right? And they didn't even back him up. They're like, oh no, we're fine. We're good with the money. We're fine. It's like throw you under the bus sort of thing, right? Totalitarian kitsch, right? You're sort of alone. How does he put it? It puts a folding screen, sets up a folding screen. Chapter 11. In the realm of totalitarian kitsch, all answers are given in advance and preclude any questions. It follows then that the true opponent of totalitarian kitsch is the person who asks questions. A question is like a knife that slices through the stage backdrop and gives us a look at what lies hidden behind it. In fact, that was exactly how Sabina had explained the meaning of her paintings to Teresa. On the surface, an intelligible lie. Underneath, the unintelligible truth showing through, right? The picture of the building, the structure, that's what it looks like, but the splash revealing the harshness, the craziness, the chaos underlying it all. Sabina had once had an exhibit that was organized by a political organization in Germany. When she picked up the catalog, the first thing she saw was a picture of herself with a drawing of barbed wire superimposed on it. Inside, she found a biography that read like the life of a saint or a martyr. She had suffered, struggled against injustice, been forced to abandon her bleeding homeland, yet was carrying on the struggle. Her paintings are a struggle for happiness, was the final sentence. She protested, but they did not understand her. Do you mean that modern art isn't persecuted under communism? My enemy is kitsch, not communism, she replied, infuriated. From that time on, she began to insert mystifications in her biography, and by the time she got to America, she even managed to hide the fact that she was Czech. It was all merely a desperate attempt to escape the kitsch that people wanted to make of her life, right? She's one of those type that, she's like, I want to be honest. I want to, I don't want to hide shit. I want to leave it out in the open. And I don't want to pretend I'm something I'm not. And I don't want you to encapsulate me in some storybook version. All her life, this is the middle of page 255, all her life she had proclaimed kitsch her enemy. But hadn't she in fact been carrying it with her? Her kitsch was her image of home, all peace, quiet, and harmony, and ruled by a loving mother and wise father. It was an image that took shape within her after the death of her parents. The less her life resembled that sweetest of dreams, the more sensitive she was to its magic. And more than once, she actually shed tears when the ungrateful daughter in a sentimental film embraced the neglected father as the windows of the happy family's house shone out into the dying day. Right, so even Sabina is becoming, entranced with some form of kitsch. On 256, close to the top. Had she then herself, on the threshold of old age, found the parents who had been snatched from her as a girl? Had she at last found the children she had never had herself? Remember I said she finds this old couple to take care of and they become her kids and her parents at the same time. She was well aware it was an illusion. Her days with the aging couple were merely a brief interval. The old man was seriously ill, and when his wife was left on her own, she'd go to live with their son in Canada. Sabina's path of betrayals would then continue elsewhere. And from the depths of her being, a silly, mawkish song about two shining windows and the happy family living behind them would occasionally make its way into the unbearable lightness of being. Touched by the song, Sabina did not take her feelings seriously. She knew only too well that the song was a beautiful lie. As soon as kitsch is recognized for the lie it is, it moves into the context of non-kitsch, thus losing its authoritarian power and becoming as touching as any other human weakness. For none among us is Superman enough to escape kitsch completely. No matter how we scorn it, kitsch is an integral part of the human condition. Right? So again, he has fun with kitsch, he craps on it. I hate kitsch myself, but again, even I cry when Old Yeller died. And you've seen me get emotional in this class, so come on, right? Who am I kidding? I care, as much as I try to pretend I don't. I care, we all care at some level, right? We all have this, warm sentimentality in us. Some have very little, but it's there. Kitsch has its source in the categorical agreement with being. But what is the basis of being? God? Mankind? Struggle? Love? Man? Woman? Since opinions vary, there are various kitsches: Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, communist, fascist, democratic, feminist, European, American, national, international. Since the days of the French Revolution, one half of Europe has been referred to as the left, the other half as the right. Yet to define one or the other by means of the theoretical principles it professes is all but impossible. And no wonder. Political movements rest not so much on rational attitudes as on fantasies, images, words, and archetypes that come together to make up this or that political kitsch. The fantasy of the Grand March, told you we'd finally get to it. The fantasy of the Grand March that Franz, now we're back to Franz, that Franz was so intoxicated by, is the political kitsch, joining leftists of all times and tendencies. The Grand March is the splendid march on the road to brotherhood, equality, justice, happiness. It goes on and on, obstacles notwithstanding. For obstacles there must be, if the march is to be the Grand March. The dictatorship of the proletariat or democracy, rejection of the consumer society or demands for increased productivity, the guillotine or an end to the death penalty. It is all beside the point. What makes a leftist is not this or that theory, but his ability to integrate any theory into the kitsch called the Grand March. Okay? And this is what Franz falls for. What an idiot, right? What a fool, right? I think unequivocally he sucks. Like, I like Franz, but I feel bad for the guy. This is like, if I was writing my paper, it'd be on Franz for sure, right? And I'd probably be using Camus. So anyway, Camus, I think Camus would have loved Thomas. I don't know if we're gonna get that far in this class. I'll have to wait till next hour, but the very end of the book, when Thomas and Teresa are dancing, I think that Camus would have loved that scene, right? What he says to Teresa, because she feels so bad. She feels like, I destroyed your life, because I'm just some whiny baby that can't, you gotta be this, gotta do that. He's like, no, I'm glad, right? I'm glad I don't have a mission. Missions are stupid, right? I'm happy here in the country, right? I think he was able to pick up the rock and go up the hill again like Sisyphus, I suppose, to use Camus' metaphor. But what does he do? What does he do, Franz, at the end of the chapter in service of the Grand March? He gets a call from one of his friends to do what? What's he invited to go do?
Protest or?
Yeah, he's going to go to Cambodia, to the border between Vietnam and Cambodia. Vietnam and Cambodia? I guess that's where they're at. I forgot where they flow to. But it was some bordering country, right, Cambodia. Because this is during the Khmer Rouge, right? If you don't know about the Khmer Rouge, look it up. It's disgusting, and our government kind of helped start it, right? It was bad. Come on in if you're outside knocking. Somebody out there trying to get in. I saw somebody at the door. I told my students from my earlier class they can come to this class, and I just saw them, so I don't know. You better not interrupt my recording. But anyway, yeah, so he's going to Cambodia. This is under The Killing Fields is a movie. I haven't seen it since I was I was probably a teenager. It came out in the late 80s, but it's a gory film. It's about some journalist who is covering the slaughters in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot was like the leader there. But all these people are being murdered, right? Just being put in concentration camps and murdered and starved to death. And so all these American scholars and journalists and like this Hollywood actress and some hippie musician guy, they all come to this hotel. And Franz is invited. Remember Franz? What does he do? He's a professor, And so he goes to this hotel, and they're going to march to the border of Cambodia with supplies, with food, with humanitarian aid, and they're going to demand that the Khmer Rouge let them in. And we're not here for political reasons. We are just here to bring food and provisions to the hungry people of Cambodia. And what ends up happening when they get to the border of Cambodia? They stand in this bridge and what? Oh, I'm skipping a lot. Yeah, that was a funny scene. I wasn't going to talk about it, but yeah, the actress, she's a real idiot, right? I think, this is not really fair, but I think she's based on Jane Fonda. I don't think Jane Fonda was that dumb. I think he's being really mean to Jane Fonda, but I think that's, or the Jane Fonda type. The Jane Fonda type. And I think he's even talking about Noam Chomsky, because he's like the professor of linguistics. I'm like, that sounds like Chomsky. And this is around the time when those guys were politically active. And what do you think the point he's making is of this whole scene? You're right, the landmine, for those of you who didn't do the reading, She's doing like a photo op, right? She wants to be at the head of the line. They're all debating on who's going to be in the front, and she wants to be in the front because she's Hollywood. And the French guys are mad because they're the ones that organized it. And they're like, why are the Americans taking over? We're the ones that came up with the idea. We should be in the front. It's like, why are you speaking English? We have to speak French. And they would, it was just they wanted to take the torch, and they want to be the front of the line. And then I guess, again, the landmine happens when the photographer is trying to take a picture of the actress with the musician guy, and they're like, and he steps on the landmine, the photographer does, and blows up, and his blood splatters all over their white flag, and they're just, after that, they shut up, right? The actress and the musician are like, oh, okay, we're gonna stop being dicks now. But what happens when they get to the border? What happens when they get to the actual bridge? Nothing. Silence. It is embarrassing. It's like, they're just, we're gonna go save the world. Come on, Khmer Rouge, come on. It's just like crickets, nothing. But yeah, he's getting a call from this guy, and who's sitting across from him, his student, or who he should have stayed with, right? That's really who he should have stayed with. This is at the bottom of 258. No sooner had he hung up the phone that he regretted his decision. Because initially he says no. He's looking at her, he says, no, I shouldn't go. So first he says no. True, he had taken care of his earthly mistress, right, the woman sitting in front of him, but he had neglected his unearthly love. Who's his unearthly love? Sabina, remember? That's his, she's still there. Even though she left him, she's still there, and he's gonna make her proud, right? He's gonna go to Cambodia and make her proud. His unearthly love, his unearthly love. Wasn't Cambodia the same as Sabina's country? A country occupied by its neighbor's communist army? A country that had felt the brunt of Russia's fist? All at once, Franz felt that his half-forgotten friend had contacted him at Sabina's secret bidding. Heavenly bodies know all and see all. If he went on the march, Sabina would gaze down on him enraptured. She would understand that he had remained faithful to her. Would you be terribly upset if I went on the march? He asked the girl with the glasses, who counted every day away from him a loss, yet could not deny him a thing. Several days later, he was in a large jet taking off from Paris with 20 doctors and about 50 intellectuals. Professors, writers, diplomats, singers, actors, and mayors, as well as 400 reporters and photographers. Right? A bunch of idiots. I might have gone too, to be honest. So he's like, hey, let's go to Cambodia. I'm like, free trip, maybe we'll just stare at a bridge, but never been to Cambodia. I sure as hell wouldn't have been all self-righteous about it, right? I would have been happy if we could have helped them. Well, hey, that's great. We were actually able to do it. But I would have been like, oh, we are here to save the world. Get over yourself, buddy. Good, I guess, I don't know, I was about to say well-intended, but I think some of them are doing it for ego, right? It's not really to help the people. They just want to show that they're, I care, see, virtue signaling, as they say these days, right? And even Franz kind of sees this. This is on just chapter 21, page 267. In a flash of insight, Franz saw how laughable they all were. But instead of cutting him off from them or flooding him with irony, the thought made him feel the kind of infinite love we feel for the condemned. Yes, the Grand March was coming to an end. But was that any reason for Franz to betray it? Wasn't his own life coming to an end as well? Who was he to jeer at the exhibitionism of the people accompanying the courageous doctors to the border? What could they all do but put on a show? Had they any choice? Franz was right. I can't help thinking about the editor in Prague who organized the petition for the amnesty of political prisoners. That's a scene that we skip. That's where his son, meets this guy who's going to write this letter for political prisoners. Tomas is like, I'm not going to sign it, right? Just forget it, right? But in a way, Kundera's coming to that guy's defense. I was like, really? It seems like you're kind of crapping on these people the whole novel. But he says, in a way, this is, what are you going to do? You're powerless. All you do is play acting. I don't know, that seems kind of nihilistic, but let's read the rest of this passage and then I'll say more. So Franz was right. I can't help thinking about the editor in Prague who organized the petition for the amnesty of political prisoners. He knew perfectly well that his petition would not help the prisoners. His true goal was not to free the prisoners. It was to show that people without fear still exist. That too was play acting. but he had no other possibility. His choice was not between play acting and action. His choice was between play acting and no action at all. There are situations in which people are condemned to play act. Their struggle with mute power, the mute power across the river, a police transmogrified into mute microphones in the wall. This is a struggle of a theater company that has attacked an army, right? That's an image, a theater company, a Shakespeare troupe attacking an actual army, right? You're gonna die, right? You're screwed, right? I mean, I don't know, like this, I guess this is an argument against political nihilism in a sense. I consider myself politically nihilistic, and I know that's wrong, but I tried caring, and the more I care, the more it like made me depressed. So I've decided to stop caring about politics. I'm like, I can't change anything. Why should I care? Just live my life and enjoy it, right? But I have friends that are like, you need to do this. Let's go to this protest. Let's do this. And I'm like, why? You're not gonna make any difference. And they're like, you're a nihilist. I'm like, politically, kind of. But not like universally nihilistic, but yeah, politically, at least in this country. I think until we get rid of the two-party dictatorship that we've got to hold our, electoral system, I think we're screwed. Doesn't matter who you vote for. It's just two different flavors of the same BS. As far as I'm concerned, right? Maybe y'all disagree, but that's fine. You can disagree. But, he's sort of saying, even if it is all play acting, well, what else are you going to do? Just do nothing? No, like, do other things besides get involved in politics. But he's, in a way, this is kind of ties to Camus a bit, because for Camus, maybe the existentialist in general, certainly Sartre would probably say this, certainly Nietzsche, the proto-existentialist, we're all play acting, no matter how serious we take ourselves, right? We're playing a role that we sort of created, right? That's a line from Vonnegut. What is it? Be careful what you pretend to be, because you are what you pretend to be, or you become what you pretend to be. Like this. I like this chapter 23. How are we doing on time, though? Because I might have to cut us off now. Okay, we got 10 minutes. Cool. All right, we actually might finish this chapter. Awesome. So chapter 23. These are the 4 categories of people. I like this. Bit of a digression, but we got to read it. We all need someone to look at us. We can be divided into 4 categories according to the kind of look we wish to live under. The first category longs for the look of an infinite number of anonymous eyes. In other words, for the look of the public. Instagram influencers, I guess, right? That would be like a modern day example. That's the case with the German singer, the American actress, and even the tall, stooped editor with the big chin. He was accustomed to his readers, and when one day the Russians banned his newspaper, he had the feeling the atmosphere was suddenly 100 times thinner. Nothing could replace the look of unknown eyes. He thought he would suffocate. Then one day he realized that he was constantly being followed, bugged, and surreptitiously photographed in the street. Suddenly he had anonymous eyes on him and he could breathe again. He began making theatrical speeches to the microphones in his wall. In the police, he had found his lost public, right? So there's some of us that are sort of, yeah, right? He's like, hey, they're bugging me. I would do the same thing, probably. If I thought that, if I was like a mobster and I thought everything was bugged, I'd be messing with them. You know what I mean? Trying to find out the name of the cop's wife and be like, hey man, that chick was hot last night. What was her name again? Rubbing it in, doing something to piss off something, have fun with it. But I don't think I'm that kind of person, honestly. I don't know, maybe there is a bit of me. I am a freaking professor, so. But you're not anonymous to me, I guess my online students are kind of anonymous. That's why I hate teaching online now. I really don't like it. I don't feel like I'm teaching. I don't really get into it. Anybody here take online classes and like them? You're sort of wishy-washy. I have a few students that get a lot out of my classes. I feel bad about it though. I feel like my classes online suck. I'm like, man, I don't feel like I do much. I put a lot of content up there, but I just, all the assignments are ready to go. And I just wait till they're turned in and grade them. But I've had some students, I love your online class. It's better than the ones I've taken before. I think some teachers don't put anything up there. Like all they do is like read this chapter from the textbook. Here's the assignment. Like there's no lectures that are posted. Is that right? Like nothing.
I have classes like that.
Yeah. It's like, wow. I would feel like lazy to do that as a teacher. I'm like, I gotta create some curriculum or at least an outline or reading, like something to help you guys get the material, because especially this stuff, some of this stuff you just can't read. You couldn't just pick up the Camus and understand what he's saying without a little bit of background. So I don't know. So okay, the first category of people want to be looked at by some anonymous public. What about the second category? The second category is made up of people who have a vital need to be looked at by many known eyes, not anonymous, but known eyes. They are the tireless hosts of cocktail parties and dinners. They are happier than the people in the first category, who, when they lose their public, have the feeling that the lights have gone out in the room of their lives. This happens to nearly all of them sooner or later. People in the second category, on the other hand, can always come up with the eyes they need. Marie Claude and her daughter belong to the second category. Who remembers, who's Marie Claude and her daughter? What's that? Franz's wife or ex-wife, or however you want to describe her. Yeah, remember, she's like socialite, you know, she wants all these artists. Oh, he's a good artist. He's the most up and coming, the greatest, you know. All the famous people hang out at my salon, you know. And if she loses them, she'll find some more people to pretend they're important, something like that. Then what about the third category? The third category is the category of people who need to be constantly before the eyes of the person they love. Their situation is as dangerous as the situation of the people in the first category, the ones that want the anonymous eyes. One day the eyes of their beloved will close and the room will go dark. Teresa and Tomas belong in the third category. Now, luckily they died together, I guess. Right? Unlike the guy in the what is it, the Frankel reading that I read y'all, the guy that lost his wife and couldn't deal with it. And he's like, well, if she died first, or you died first, she'd be grieving. So that's the cross you have to do. All right, what about the last category? Finally, there's the fourth category, the rarest category. The category of people who live in the imaginary eyes of those who are not present. They are the dreamers. Franz, for example, he traveled to the borders of Cambodia only for Sabina. As the bus bumped along the Thai road, that's right, he's in Thailand. As the bus bumped along the Thai road, he could feel her eyes fixed on him in a long stare. Tomas's son belongs in the same category. Let me call him Simon. He will be glad to have a biblical name like his father's. I meant to look that up. Who's Simon from the Bible? We already talked about Tomas, doubting Thomas, had to poke Jesus' wounds to believe that he was back. Who's Simon? Can someone try to find that? Simon Bible, Google it or something? I'm curious. I meant to do that before class and I forgot.
Apparently he's the brother of Jesus, like the half-brother.
Is Jesus' half-brother?
I thought he was on a Jacob.
I didn't know he had a brother. I thought he was an only child. Wait, no, he did. He does. Yeah. And they're hardly ever mentioned. What does it say about him at all? Is there any scene with him in it? Maybe he's in the Acts of the Apostles?
Well, it says he preached the gospel in Egypt.
I think he's in the Acts. I think he's in Acts of the Apostles now. Like him, he's with, not with Paul. Who comes? Peter. He and Peter, I think, traveled together. I think him and Peter perform miracles like right after Jesus dies. I don't know. I could be wrong. So Jesus' half-brother, okay. I don't know how that's supposed to work in as a metaphor. Okay, so Simon was like this. He was just like Franz. He also was a dreamer, right? That he hid the eyes on him where these was some sort of imaginary eyes. The eyes he longed for were Tomas's. So his father was, he had this image of his dad. Remember, he never really knew his dad. His mother sort of kept him away from Tomas. He tried to be a dad and she just wouldn't let him, basically. He kind of gave up. But you would think that would make him hate his dad, but he actually sort of has this kind of idealistic version. I think he's a good guy. Mom was the enemy. She's the jerk, right? She would always nag about him. Your dad's a piece of crap. She's like, you're bad. You're a jerk, right? So if you don't like him, I like this guy. It's like what does it tell about his relationship with his mom? Right, so again, the eyes he longed for were Tomas's. As a result of his embroilment in the petition campaign, he was expelled from the university. Right, so he got involved in this sort of, Tomas's son got involved in this sort of revolutionary activity, and that's when he went to meet him that first time and try to get him to sign that petition. The girl he had been going out with was the niece of a village priest. He married her, became a tractor driver on a collective farm, a practicing Catholic, and a father. When he learned that Tomas too was living in the country, he was thrilled. Fate had made their lives symmetrical. This encouraged him to write Tomas a letter. He did not ask him to write back. He only wanted him to focus his eyes on his life. Franz and Simon are the dreamers of this novel. Unlike Franz, Simon never liked his mother. From childhood, he searched for his father. He was willing to believe his father the victim of some sort of injustice that predated and explained the injustice his father had perpetrated on him. He never felt angry with his father because he did not wish to ally himself with his mother, who continually maligned the man. So yeah, it kind of backfired, right? You got this single mom that tries to vilify the father, and in the end ends up sort of endearing the son to his father. And they actually do meet up again in chapter 7, which again we probably won't have time to talk about today. It's almost out of time. I've got 2 minutes, and I've only got 2 passages I want to read. So bear with me here. We're almost done with this chapter. On 276, before I read these last passages, can someone tell me what happens to poor Franz and why I feel so sorry for the guy? What happened to him? He died. How'd he die? He didn't die at the bridge. He thought about it. He thought about, screw it, I'm going to run across the bridge and they'll shoot me and who cares, right? But then he's like, nah. Then we see him back in the town, back at the hotel.
Was he mugged?
Yeah, but how does he get mugged? This is what's kind of screwed up. How does he get mugged? Why does he get mugged? He doesn't understand the language. And somebody's like pulling his arm, his strong arm, right? So strong, got that strong body, remember. He thought someone was in danger. He thought someone was asking for help. And he's like, oh, what's going on? Someone needs help? I don't know. So he gets pulled to this, around the corner. And then this guy comes up to him, they just gang up on him. And he punches one guy, knocks him down, but he gets hit on the back of the head and becomes unconscious. Wakes up in the hospital. And what happens in the hospital? Who does he see at the hospital? His wife. And he wants to say, get away from me. I never want to see you again. Where's my glass bespeckled girl? But what happens? He can't speak. His voice is gone. He's paralyzed. And what does his wife do? He dies, but what does she do to his legacy? Basically. She basically writes a story, making her this saint. Oh, Franz, he ran away, but he came back to me in the end, and all this crap, and tells all. And that girl he was with, he just this ugly girl, she's at the funeral crying in the back, sobbing and can't say. And the wife is basically taking over his legacy and rewriting the story of Franz. Exactly the opposite of what he would want, right? All right, let's finish this up. This is chapter 28. The moment he received the telegram from the chairman of the collective farm, he jumped on his motorcycle. He arrived in time to arrange for the funeral. The inscription he chose, this is actually, we're still on the son, and Tomas dies. We'll get to Franz in a minute. He arrived in time to arrange for the funeral. The inscription he chose to go under his father's name on the gravestone read, he wanted the kingdom of God on earth. That's kind of appropriate, even though Tomas was not a religious man. He wanted the kingdom of God on earth. Kind of naughty. He wanted it with all these women or whatever, but it was appropriate in a way. He was well aware that his father would not have said it in those words, but he was certain that they expressed what his father actually thought. The kingdom of God means justice. Tomas had longed for a world in which justice would reign. Hadn't Simon the right to express his father's life in his own vocabulary? Of course he had. Haven't all heirs the right, had that right from time immemorial? A return after long wanderings was the inscription adorning the stone above Franz's grave. It can be interpreted in religious terms, the wanderings being our earthly existence, the return of our return to God's embrace. But the insiders knew that it had a perfectly secular meaning as well. Indeed, Marie Claude talked about it every day. Right? After he returned after long wandering, he went away, but he came back to the woman he loved in the end. No, he didn't. He never loved you, right? Chapter 29, this is it. What remains of the dying population of Cambodia? One large photograph of an American actress holding an Asian child in her arms. What remains of Tomas? An inscription reading, he wanted the kingdom of God on earth. What remains of Beethoven? A frown, an improbable mane, a somber voice intoning Es muss sein. What remains of Franz? An inscription reading, a return after long wanderings, and so on and so forth. Before we are forgotten, we will be turned into Kitsch. Kitsch is the stopover between being and oblivion. This is very Heideggerian. We talked about Heidegger in the class before, but he talks about after we die, our whole identity is no longer our identity. Right? Sartre talks about this as well. Right? While we're alive, we get to wear what kind of clothes we want to wear. We get to express ourselves as we want to express ourselves. When we're dead, those who remember us get to define who we are and what we are. And sometimes that sucks when it's Marie Claude. Right? So I guess be careful who you associate with, I suppose. All right, I better stop it. We're already over for time. If you want to stick around, I'm starting up again in 15 minutes.